Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. As you saw by the title, in today's video we're going to be talking about how to responsibly rehome your pets, specifically your reptiles and amphibians. Before we get started, I ask that you please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon or by becoming a channel member. We'd love to have you, but if not, that's okay. I'm happy you're here anyway. Now let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to say is that I was actually requested to make this video by a subscriber and commenter on the channel, and I thought I've never seen anyone make a video like that. I'm not sure how well it'll do on my channel, but I think it's a really great resource for people who are in this tough situation. And because it is a tough situation, I want to ask that everybody be super respectful and kind in your interactions with me and in your interactions with people in the comments down below. It's a very tough situation to be in, and I would hope that my subscribers would have empathy towards people who have to make the decision to rehome their animals. Another thing I want to do is I want to start out this video by saying if you've come here because you are in the situation where you have to rehome your animals, please show yourself kindness. You've done more than a lot of people just by coming to the decision to rehome your animals because it's better for them. And you've also done a lot by coming and clicking on this video. A lot of people would not bother to do either, so don't be hard on yourself if you have to, rehome your animals, or if you're in a situation where you don't really have much of a choice, or if you just need to rehome them because it's better for them. I think that you're doing the right thing, so please show yourself some kindness. So I'm going to go over a few different scenarios because everyone's going to have a different reason for rehoming. The first scenario that I want to go over is if your animal is healthy and comes with its enclosure. I think this is probably the best way to have success rehoming an animal because you have a lot of options. So if your animal is healthy and it comes with its enclosure, you can post for rehoming on Craigslist or similar sites like Kijiji, Gumtree, which are used in other countries around the world. Or you can post the animal in Facebook rehoming groups, or if you're part of like the animal community on Instagram, you can post about it there as well. I think that you might have the most success with like a Facebook group or Craigslist because people who don't really have social media presence will be able to see that either way, because like everybody has a Facebook, and if people are looking for pets, a lot of times they'll look at their local Craigslist. In order to have the most success in rehoming your pet, if it's healthy and if it has like a proper enclosure, you'll want to post a lot of photos of the enclosure and of the animal in its condition on that Craigslist post or that Facebook post or wherever you're posting. You're also going to want to include its care information, what you're currently feeding it, and the price that you want for the enclosure and the animal. Now, keep in mind, some people are not going to want to have the enclosure. Some people might just, not prefer the things that you have. Some people might already have an enclosure and they're just looking for an animal. So keep that in mind when you're putting the pricing. If you absolutely are firm on the animal going with its enclosure, make sure you include that in the post. And if you would rather separate them because it doesn't really matter to you, you can include that in the post as well. I also recommend including separate prices. So like if you just want the animal, here's the price. If you just want the enclosure, here's the price. You can use terms like firm or best offer. Those two terms are going to help people determine if you are serious about the cost or if you're willing to negotiate a bit because you just want the animal to find a good home, or if you're understanding about different financial situations. You'll also want to include information like the sex of the animal, the species, the age, where you originally got them from. As much information as you can include, the better. And then of course you'll leave your contact information, which is usually an email or a phone number, or in the case of Facebook, it's just like your Facebook profile where they can message you. And then once you post, you just have to wait and hear from people. When you get messages from people, you're going to want to ask them a lot of questions. This might be off-putting to some people, and if you have the time to spend rehoming your animal and you're not in a rush, I really recommend kind of vetting people. Sorry if it looks different, we have a minor interruption, but anyways, back to what I was saying. You're gonna want to really vet people because the people that will listen to your questions and answer them thoughtfully are also going to be the people who most likely put a lot of effort into caring for the animal that you're trying to rehome. And it's really going to be up to you what type of husbandry requirements are going to be adequate for you to feel safe rehoming your animal to them. If they want to do something a little bit different than you, it's going to be up to you if that's acceptable or not. But on a very basic level, like the bare minimum questions you should be asking are if they know anything about that species, what their husbandry will look like, if they don't want your enclosure, what their enclosure looks like. Also, might not be a bad idea to recommend your vet if you have one and see if they're receptive to that as well. Now, local rehoming is easiest, but this can take a while because if you want to find someone who's going to be dedicated to taking care of the animal that you have, that itself can take a while. And if you only are rehoming locally, that's going to be a smaller pool of people. Now, if you're comfortable shipping reptiles, you can certainly broaden your reach. But again, that's going to be something I think for people who are experienced with shipping reptiles. Now, if you find someone to rehome your reptile to and you feel confident with them and you go and meet up with them, make sure that 1, it is in public, it is not your home address. 2, you have someone else with you, or at the very least, people know where you're going and you're constantly texting them like, hey, I'm at this place, share your location with someone that you trust. That way they know where you ended up and where you met them. Just be as safe as possible, and I will include up here a video about how to safely get animals off of Craigslist, and a lot of the rules that are in that video for, meeting people in public safely will also be applicable to this video or to you trying to rehome your pet. Just make sure that you are being as safe as possible. You can't trust people to have your best intentions or your safety at mind. You've got to do that for yourself, unfortunately. If you need to rehome your reptile quickly, or if your reptile is ill or has inadequate husbandry in some way, this is going to complicate things because there are going to be less people that are interested, and if they are, they're not going to want to put a lot of money towards a rehoming fee because they're going to, need to probably take it to a vet or get an entire new enclosure for it. Now, you might not be aware that your husbandry is bad or considered bad to the vast majority of keepers. For example, if you have a leopard gecko and you're currently keeping it in a 10-gallon, there's tons of keepers who would consider that too small. You might not have known. The pet store might have told you that that was fine, and I'm not trying to fault you for that, but you might come into contact with people who will say, I don't want the enclosure, that's too small. And then you might, feel not as great because you put a lot of money into spending on the enclosure and getting the equipment and things, and people don't want them. That definitely could be a problem you run into. Or you could have an animal that's ill, and some people unfortunately don't recognize things like metabolic bone disease or stuck shed on their reptile. Now, if you do recognize that your reptile is ill and you're trying to rehome it to someone who's going to be able to rehabilitate it, you're going to want to have no rehoming fee essentially, or a very small one, or just put a rehoming fee. That way you don't get people who are just interested in free pets, and then when the person actually reaches out and they prove they have some sort of knowledge about the species you're rehoming, then you can be like, listen, there's no rehoming fee. I messed up and you're probably going to need to spend some money at the vet rehabilitating this animal, so no rehoming fee. Just keep in mind that if your husbandry is incorrect in some way, if your animal is really ill, or if you're trying to rehome quickly because you have to move or because you have, life circumstances that have gotten in the way of you being able to house this animal, you're going to want to get rid of the rehoming fee or the expectation that you're going to be able to get as much money as you put into the animal. Now, if you need to rehome quickly or if your animal is ill, you can still use Craigslist or any of the similar sites like that. However, it might also be prudent to have a reptile rescue or the Humane Society if they take reptiles, or some sort of shelter where you can drop them off if you, again, know that they're ill or if you know that you need to rehome them really quickly. Again, you will not be getting a rehoming fee in that situation. You can try and sell the supplies separately on Craigslist because you'll probably have more time to do that. You can take them with you if you're moving, or you can also donate them to the shelter with your animal. Just know that if you are in a rush or if your animal is sick, you might want to explore your options and be comfortable with the idea that you are not going to be getting financial compensation for your animal. Now, again, you might not realize that your animal has anything wrong with it, and this is unfortunately the case with Craigslist. I'll see animals posted for rehoming that have metabolic bone disease or really bad stuck shed or some sort of injury, or they're really underweight or really obese, and people will be expecting a lot of money for, in my opinion, a kind of a lackluster setup and an ill animal, and I think that that's just not reasonable. And again, if you don't realize that these things are wrong, that's okay. You're doing your best now. That's all anybody can ask. Just try and understand that if you're rehoming an animal that is ill or otherwise unhealthy, or the enclosure is improper, or you have to rehome them quickly, that you might not get a rehoming fee. And that has to be something that you're okay with, because If you're here, I imagine it's because you are interested in the welfare of the animal more so than you're interested in receiving financial, compensation for the money that you put out buying this animal and getting its enclosure. Now, if you're one of the people that wants to make that money back, you can still try Facebook and Craigslist. However, keep in mind, most people are not going to want to buy a sickly animal. And if you're in a rush, you might rehome to someone who doesn't have the knowledge needed because you just need to rehome the animal quickly, so you might not have time to vet them. So these are all things to keep in mind. So now I want to talk about some of the things that you absolutely should not do if you're rehoming an animal. Number one, please do not release the animal outside. In most places, the animal will just die. Like, it will starve to death or freeze to death, or will be, overheated to death depending on the time of year. Most likely freeze to death though, because reptiles are, cold-blooded. Most likely die in a really slow and unkind way, or they'll be eaten by something else. So there's that. Two, it's also bad because they could be an invasive species. If it's warm enough where you live and, they're able to thrive, then you've just released an invasive species into your environment, which is really not good. It's really irresponsible to just release them into the wild. And this is with any animal. This is with reptiles, this is with rodents, this is with dogs, cats, birds. It's just unkind. Now, if you live where they occur naturally, it's still not a good idea to do, because likely the animal that you have is captive bred or has been living in captivity for a long time, and releasing them to the wild still could mean that they don't have a source of food because they've been used to being fed in their enclosure, or they become predated on and then they die. So it's just really unkind. I really strongly recommend not doing this. Number two, do not euthanize the animal at home. Yes. That is a very real thing that people do. They will put their pet in the freezer, or they will crush its head. They'll do some sort of lethal act against the animal that will euthanize it at home because they don't want to go to the vet and have it euthanized, or they don't have a vet, or they don't have the money, and the animal either is like on death's door or they just don't want it anymore. This is so inhumane, dangerous. Unless you're a professional who has euthanized animals before, I really don't recommend doing this. I mean, especially if the animal isn't unhealthy or on death's door, there's no reason to end its life. I can't say enough how much I don't recommend doing this. And yes, people do this. I have received DMs about this. I've heard of people doing this. It's awful. Please don't. If you have an animal you need to rehome, or you need to surrender to a vet or humane society or whatever, please do it. Don't go the route of releasing them to the wild or euthanizing them at home. Please don't. Number three, do not drop the animal off on the front step of a shelter or a rescue organization, because there's no guarantee that they'll get to it in time, or if the weather is bad, the animal could suffer in the box or whatever you leave them in outside. It's just a dangerous situation. Someone could step on them. Make sure you contact someone. If you need to drop off your animal at the Humane Society or at a shelter or a rescue or the vet or whatever, make sure you come into contact with someone. And if they can't help you, they will be able to give you resources to someone who's able to help you. Just dropping them off on a doorstep is not going to be a safe option. Number four, do not simply give the animal to an unwilling or uneducated person. Unfortunately, this is super common. I'll get DMs with people saying, oh, my kid left for college and they've left their pet with me. Oh, my brother moved out and he left his pet behind. Oh, my friend didn't know how to take care of this animal and they gave it to me and I have no idea what to do. And it's just so irresponsible, and also really unfair to the person who's now burdened by this animal that they didn't intend to have, that they have no knowledge over and no desire to care for. So please find someone who's interested in keeping the species that you are rehoming, instead of just dumping the animal on somebody else, where it will probably suffer because the person didn't want it in the first place. Now, that's not saying every situation would end up like that, but I'm just saying, trust me, I've got the DMs, I've got the comments to prove it. Number five, do not abandon the animal. If you have to leave your house in an emergency, bring the animal with you. A lot of times you can drop it off at a shelter or contact some sort of rescue situation. Unfortunately, these situations happen, whether it's an emergency, whether it's financial, whether it's health related. But please do not just leave the animal inside. If you have to leave the animal at home, contact someone immediately who can go and retrieve the animal. There's cases, so many cases, of people who leave their animals behind in their homes, and then the animals are just stuck there to starve to death. It's really unkind. It's really cruel. So please do everything in your power if you're in a situation where you have to just leave, like whether it's an emergency or health related, like I said already. Please have someone else go and retrieve the animal. Call the Humane Society, call a friend, call a neighbor, have someone go and retrieve the animal. And then at least, you know, it's in proper hands at that point where it can then be rehomed to somebody else, or something can happen with it where it's not just left to suffer. Especially if it's a reptile or an amphibian or some sort of species that can live months without eating. It's really unkind to do this. There have been cases of reptiles being found in abandoned warehouses or sheds or homes, and they've been there for a long time, and usually by the time that they're discovered, there's multiple fatalities. There's also a lot of ones that are still alive and in really horrible condition. The enclosures haven't been cleaned, they haven't been provided food or fresh water, the animals have degrees of stuck shed or mites or injury, or, you know, just extreme dehydration and malnourishment. Like, it's really cruel. It's really cruel. So please don't just abandon them. I understand there's situations where people have to, and I'm trying to be as empathetic as possible, but just do everything in your power to be able to get them out of that situation as quickly as possible. Number 6, I've already mentioned this one, but please don't expect to make a profit. Like, not only should you not expect to recoup all the money that you've spent on getting your pet in the first place and setting them up and everything, and your vet costs and all that, you should also not expect to make a profit. I know some people will flip animals, so they'll take them from Craigslist and they'll immediately try to resell it or rehome it to someone who will spend more than they spent on it, and then therefore they've made a profit off of this animal, which is really unethical and unkind thing to do in the first place. I want people to be aware of the fact that when you are rehoming your animal, you're probably not going to get the same amount that you spent on them, and you're certainly not going to be making more than you spent on them. So try to keep in mind when you're rehoming that you have to do so from a place of not expecting to have any sort of financial gain. I think that's like the biggest thing I see on Craigslist is people selling these really ugly, inadequate enclosures for like $200 with like a pet store gecko. And it's like, I'm sorry if you spent close to that amount at the pet store. No one is going to want to spend that much on Craigslist for a 10 gallon with like a hide and a basking lamp and a gecko. Like, there's no way people are going to want to spend that. So try to bring down your expectations a bit. Now, I want to talk about this last part because there are a small amount of people, I don't know if it's small, but I don't want to make it sound like everyone. It's definitely not everyone. But there are people who rehome pets with frequency. There's people who rehome pets just because they get bored and then they get a new one and then they get bored of that and then they rehome that one, you know, and get a new one because they're bored and then rehome that one. So there's people who have like a habit of doing this. There's people who don't take pet keeping seriously, and I doubt any of them actually are on this video, but I want to include it just in case, and maybe I can reach them somehow. And again, there's no judgment from me. Everybody, you know, keeps pets differently. Everyone comes into keeping pets differently. And unfortunately for a lot of people, they were not raised to see animals outside of dogs and cats as having feelings, as having thoughts, as having emotions, as needing proper care. Like, we still see people keeping goldfishes in bowls. We still see people keeping betta fish in like a vase. We still see people, you know, thinking reptiles can't feel pain. So I just want to be as clear as possible when I say I have empathy, but I want to go ahead and list these things because they might be things that a person should consider if they're rehoming their animal and if they plan to maybe get one in the future. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Number 1, if you were driven to rehoming the animal because of financial reasons, maybe wait a while and build up enough financial security before getting another animal. I have seen people who buy an animal, have the setup for it, and then it needs vet care, and they're like, oh, that's too expensive for me, I'm rehoming it, and then immediately get another reptile. Animal also might need vet care in the future, and if you don't have enough financial security to provide an animal with vet care the first time around, maybe you should wait a while until you're in a better place before you get another one that might also need vet care. Number 2, if you were driven to rehoming the animal because of lack of interest, so you got bored of it, or you didn't see it as much as you wanted to, or you didn't enjoy keeping that species as much as you wanted to, don't just immediately rehome it and then try to get that species again in the future. The likelihood of you enjoying keeping that species again is low. So, some people, like, reptiles aren't their thing. That's fine. So they, get a reptile, they're like, I'm not really into this, and then instead they get, like, I don't know, a hamster or a bird or something, and because they're more interactive, maybe it's their thing. That is totally okay. I 100% respect that decision, especially since for myself, like, for example, birds aren't really my thing. Birds are cool, but they require a lot of attention and a lot of work, and that's not for me. So, like, I know myself that I wouldn't go out and get a bird, but I'm just saying some people have to actually experience that before they decide that that animal isn't for them. And so I'm just saying, if you've come to that decision that a certain species is not for you, perhaps continue to feel that way in the future. If you want to interact with that species again, maybe don't go out and buy one, but make a friend who has that species, and then you can interact with theirs and be like, oh, this actually is pretty cool, maybe I'll try it again. But don't just immediately jump back into it, because it's kind of like setting yourself up for failure. Number 3, if you were driven to rehoming the animal because it was ill or because it was neglected, I urge you to do more research before you ever get that type of animal again. Like, if you, for example, had a leopard gecko and it ended up getting metabolic bone disease, or it ended up having really bad malnourishment, or it ended up passing away, any of those things, I urge you, before you run out and get another one to replace that one, or before you get another reptile in general, please do so much research. And I know it can be hard to reach people like that, because I guarantee a lot of them aren't on this video in the first place. Bottom line is, just make sure that you do a lot of research before getting a reptile again, or that species again, or something that's in the similar wheelhouse. Number 4, if you were driven to rehoming because the animal was a pet for a child, please stop. Please stop buying animals for children. If you do, you have to understand it's going to be 100% the parent's responsibility, or your responsibility as the person who's buying it, because a child is not responsible for themselves. They're literally the responsibility of the parents. So by default, the pet would also be the responsibility of the parents. I can't tell you how many animals, not only that I have, but that I've seen, that have been rehomed because the kid got bored. If you rehome the pet because your kid got bored of it, don't run out and get them another. They'll probably still get bored of it. And lastly, if you were driven to rehoming because you got too many reptiles and then weren't able to care for them all, either time-wise, space-wise, or financially, this is something that happens to a lot of reptile people, or, I think it goes beyond reptiles, but we'll just stick to reptiles because this is a reptile channel. But this has happened to a lot of reptile people, and I urge you to be very aware of yourself, very aware of your financial situation, your capabilities, your time, your attention span. Like, just be aware of the fact that it could happen to anyone. Anyone can become overwhelmed by the amount that they have. And when it does happen to you, you need to be responsible and take the measures to reduce the amount of reptiles that you have, or just reduce your time outside of keeping reptiles. Like, maybe you need to put more time into it. But if you've decided that you don't have the energy, the money, the time, the interest in that many reptiles, you need to rehome. And a big problem that I've seen is people will come to this conclusion where they'll say, oh, I have too many reptiles, I'm going to rehome some. And then a few months later, they start to get more again. If you are aware that it's a problem for you, you need to be constantly aware of it. That way you're not pulled to getting more reptiles again in the future and then overwhelming yourself again. This is a dangerous tightrope to walk for some people. So I just want you to be very aware that everyone has different limits. Like, for me, I have tons of reptiles, but this is the only thing I really do. Like, this is my job, and I care for them really well, and I have plenty of time to give them, plenty of attention to give them. But I also wouldn't want another 20. Like, I'm comfortable where I'm at. So you have to know your limits. And part of that is, don't put yourself in situations where you might feel inclined to get another reptile. Don't go to expos if you feel like when you go there, you are pressured to bring one home. Don't, go to Craigslist if you know you have trouble helping out all the animals that you can, because you're gonna see some on Craigslist that will need help unfortunately. They're always there. But if you are already at your limit, you will do more harm by bringing that reptile into your home and neglecting it further than it already has been, or neglecting the ones you already have in favor of the new ones. So please just be very aware of that. If you're rehoming because you have become overwhelmed with the amount you have, then pause and don't get more for a long time until, you know, you're at a comfortable place where you can give more time to them. So that was a very long video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm really not sure who this video will be for. I'm not sure how well it'll do, but I thought it was an interesting topic and I really wanted to cover it because it was requested from a subscriber. If you ever have any videos you want to see, you can leave them down below in the comment section of any video, or you can leave them on like a community tab post in the comments as well. I'm happy to take any suggestions from you guys that I can potentially make into a video in the future. Again, this might not be very applicable to everyone, but you know, if this helps just one person who comes across it, then I'll be happy. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed or found this informational and insightful. If you did, let me know by leaving a like. Also, please leave a comment. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon or by becoming a channel member. We'd love to have you. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. And a special thank you from me, Benjamin, and the rest of the animals here at Discuss Animal Friends to our patrons and channel members.